Thank you for joining us today. This is the People's Perspective, and I'm Senator Gill. We know that one of the cornerstones of our democracy is the right of a free press. Last December, the governor signed into law my legislation S-108, which guarantees the right to freedom of expression for student journalists in public, colleges, and schools. Prior to this legislation, the United States Supreme Court limited the First Amendment rights of student journalists. We need student journalists more than ever now to inform our communities, particularly because there are fewer and fewer local media outlets. These student journalists have broken many important stories. For example, student journalists at Arizona State University were the first to report on the resignation of the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine as part of the 2019 Trump-Ukraine investigation. Today, to join us in this exciting conversation, John Tagliareni. John is the former president and current board member of the Garden State Scholastic Press Association. He is a former journalism teacher and one of the leaders of the New Jersey New Voices team. We also have with us Hillary Davis. Hillary is the Advocacy and Organizing Director with the Student Press Law Center. The Student Press Law Center provides information, training, and legal aid to student journalists, as well as the educators who work with them. And one of these outstanding student journalists we're so proud to have today is Sara Fajardo. Sara is a journalism major at Rutgers, where she is the reporter for the Daily Targum. She was the editor for her school newspaper at Governor Livingston High School, and she advocated for this law as a member of the New Jersey New Voices team. Sara continues to work with the Student Press Law Center and as a New Voices student advocate. So thank you all for joining us, and let's just jump in. John, can you kind of tell us a bit about the process of getting this bill passed?
Yes. And again, thank you, Senator, for your help. You were amazing. And as others were, Senator Turner, of course, as a co-sponsor, prime co-sponsor, and in the Assembly side, Assemblyman Caputo and Assemblyman Wirths. It was bipartisan. We had unanimous votes in both houses, which was incredible. So, again, we're thrilled that it passed, and we're very happy to be here. As far as the process was concerned, we started out very slowly. In this time, I actually had worked on this many, many years ago, and actually did get past the Assembly, and we knew we had support from Governor Florio at the time, as you know. But when that didn't work, we said, well, we still have the New Jersey Constitution. We had experts at the Student Press Law Center, Mark Goodman in particular, who said, look, you could use that First Amendment that will protect you, and the students kind of will be able to overcome the restrictions on that Hazelwood decision. So that was fine, except that students still were getting censored. And they did challenge. The Student Press Law Center helped them out. There were lawsuits. But also, a big part of this, which the bill now covers, is that teachers were being fired and harassed, transferred, and now, and we felt that we needed to do something about that. So that's why we tried again, and we were successful, but it took a long time. But we needed to get people to understand what this bill really would do. There were a lot of myths that, students could write anything they wanted, things would be out of control, principals wouldn't be able to control their, students. And, we really had to explain that that was not the case, that the students.
And to whom did you explain it? Because I think you did an excellent job in advocacy and the students as part of it. Can you tell us a little about the advocacy,
Sure.
the actual writing the postcards and calling the legislators and engaging?
And so what we did was we had a student chapter through the Garden State Scholastic Press Association. And from that, as we did our conferences, we focused on New Voices advocacy all along for the last number of years. And so students got involved, and we actually had postcards that students would send to legislators. We organized it so that the students could just, fill it out, and we knew where to send it. Tom McHale, who was my partner in all this from Hunterdon County Regional High School, did an amazing job of making sure that everything was organized. And so we went on this campaign, and the students were fabulous. I mean, they just, really got involved in the whole process, sending emails, making phone calls. And that was something that I think also impressed them, and especially at the hearings, because between the Senate hearing and the Assembly hearing, students were involved in that process. And I think that it took, maybe the legislators to see these kids are just very impressive. They're very intelligent. They are articulate, and they're responsible, and they're not going to do things that would be harmful to their schools.
Because I think one of the main things that I'm very honored to have been able to be part of the process, was the advocacy and the engagement of the students as stakeholders. And they were able to articulate their positions. And I know, and Sara, I kind of would like to know, what was your experience as a student journalist, and why did students like you advocate for the change in the law? And what do you think you learned about American democracy as a part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me, my allergies.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I first got involved through, Mr. Tag mentioned it, but the Garden State Scholastic Press Association. So for anyone unfamiliar, that's a group that meets once a month, and it's students in journalism from all across the state. So we would get together, and we eventually started talking about all of our instances of censorship or self-censorship. And I know I did, at least, and I'm sure everyone else did too. We started to realize that this was a real problem, and we wanted to do something about it because there were so many stories we wanted to publish, and we were either told no or we decided to self-censor. And I know for me, after attending the New Voices Institute, I really realized that I was self-censoring, and that kind of turned the light bulb off in my brain that I really want to do something about this. And by self-censoring, because I wasn't familiar with that until I went to the New Voices Institute, but I would kind of say, oh no, Sara, don't write that. People will get upset, or don't interview someone because the school won't like it, or anything like that. So no one was telling me not to, but I was already worried because prior to the New Voices bills, we did have prior review in my school and most other schools in New Jersey as well. So it was easy for the principal or assistant principal or your advisor to say, no, don't publish that. It could ruffle some feathers. So I think all of that combined just made me really want to get involved. And as like a newspaper geek, I wanted to be writing those articles that I knew would make an impact, or something that honestly just interested me and I thought would interest the community. And I kind of didn't want anyone to tell me no.
What do you think was the article that you wrote that you feel had the most impact from your standpoint as a student journalist?
Wow. I wrote an article when I was 16, I think, and it was actually when I was attending a summer program in Boston, and I wrote about, it was called the Gender Bending Fashion Exhibit at the MFA, which is a museum up there. And it was my first time interviewing people out in the wild. So I waited outside the exhibit and I just begged people to talk to me. So it was kind of scary, but got me out of my comfort zone. And it was the first time I'd ever written something like that wasn't just about my high school and could be seen as controversial. And I learned so much. And it was just super interesting. I love fashion and I love anything pop culture-y. So it was awesome to be able to write about that. And then my mom actually posted it on Facebook and everyone was commenting. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think anyone would read this. And then the editor of my town newspaper asked if she could publish it because she loved it so much. And I just got so much feedback, not only from my friends, but from just random moms in town. And I think it also opened a lot of people's eyes in my small suburban community to this exhibit that was so groundbreaking.
Well, that's it. And I know that you are on the newspaper at Rutgers. So what do you intend to do going forward? And now, are you involved in any particular story now and you'd like to talk about, a journalistic endeavor?
Yeah, so this was my first semester on the newspaper. So I did a lot of I hate to say the word boring, but run-of-the-mill news articles. But a lot of my peers who are higher up have been writing so many wonderful articles about the hate crimes against Asian women in New York City and in New Jersey. We had a Rutgers alum actually who was a victim a few months ago and was killed. So there were a lot of articles surrounding that. And I think it's so important to highlight those issues, and also thanks to New Voices legislation that we can publish those without fear of anyone turning them down or saying we can't publish them. And I think it's just a really important movement to be a part of, especially being in New Jersey, so close to the city, and with such, Rutgers is actually a majority school. So it's awesome to be able to write about those. And it makes me really proud to be a part of the Targum.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know Hillary, we helped to make sure that you're legally protected, that you have that kind of freedom of expression. So, Hillary, how does the Student Press Law Center help students advocate for journalism and give them the legal framework to go forward?
Well, first and foremost, the Student Press Law Center is an organization that exists entirely for student journalists and their advisors. Really, the core of our work is our legal hotline, which is available to answer any and all questions that student journalists and advisors have around student media. And that can encompass a whole lot of things. So that's questions about libel or slander. We'll do a libel check to make sure everything is on the up and up. Questions about copyright, questions about fair use, Freedom of Information Acts, all of that. But we also deal with a lot of complaints and concerns about censorship that we've all been talking about, right? We are the organization that hears from the student journalists who have been censored for any variety of reasons, and we help partner them with maybe local counsel if we need to fight back against that censorship, or help them with the strategies to fight against that censorship, know their rights, really move forward. And that also includes the advisors who, as John mentioned, very often are the victims of the censorship themselves, because while it's very difficult sometimes for a school administrator to tell a student, you can't publish this, it's a lot easier for them to squeeze the advisor and to say, well, your kids really shouldn't be talking about this. You know, maybe you're not the right advisor for the program. Maybe we need to think about a change. And that's how we see a lot of the censorship that happens. So that's the core of our work. It's a free legal hotline that is available. I encourage everybody to check it out at splc.org. We're available for you at any point. We also do a lot of education, as I mentioned, for student journalists around their rights and about, you know, how to go about doing media efficiently, effectively, responsibly. My work, I'm really fortunate to work with the advisors and the students like John and Sara, who are trying to restore and protect the freedom of the student press across the country. These grassroots groups have existed in every state for decades now, working to get student press freedom protections passed. And I just help them to make the job a little bit easier. I help them to know what seems normal in a legislative state house, what some of the strategies should be, some of the background, grease the wheels a little bit for them to get done what it is that they want to do. I'm really fortunate to be able to work directly with all of the incredible advocates on this work and to help them get things done. We also engage in educating everybody once the bill is passed. So in New Jersey here, within the last 2 weeks, we've actually been sending information to every single school district, every single school board around model policies. The new law requires that they're supposed to have a freedom of expression policy in place before the school year. To make that easier, we've gone ahead and sent out a model policy to everybody. And we are engaged now in making sure that every student journalist, every advisor, every principal, every superintendent knows what the law says, knows it's there, make sure that there's just no questions. And we'll continue to do that in New Jersey forever, as far as I'm concerned, to make sure that everybody is protected under the law.
And I find that to be very fascinating, because we sometimes don't think about student journalists with respect to the right, the freedom of expression. And so by understanding that, I think we allow for this intellectual idea and exchange and fighters for freedom of expression with student journalists. And they are sometimes more close to the ground in the community, and their viewpoint as young adults who have a right for that expression, who have a right to question, and who have a right to compare and to advise. Because I found with the lobbying efforts and all the other things, they informed us. Mm-hmm. They made the legislature understand that these bright, committed students were not adversarial, that they wanted to be able to have the freedom to express in a journalistic way their ideas and their concerns, and not only what was important to the community, but what was important to them on an international level. And I think the student journalists are to be commended, and their voices are to be heard. But they came to the State House. They shaped public policy. And when you send out the requirements for the law to the schools, remember Sara. Remember all of those, I call them children, do you mind, Sara? Young adults who were committed to this. You brought about the change with the help, of course, of the others. But Sara, you brought about the change with student journalists. And now look at the impact that Sara and her other student journalists will have for years to come on future student journalists. So I am proud that the students and John and allowed me to be part of this. And so John, now, can someone first tell me what's the New Voices movement, so that the community will know?
Hillary.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. So the New Voices movement is really teachers and students who have said, we are going to restore and protect the freedom of the student press. As you mentioned, Senator Gill, there is this U.S. Supreme Court decision going back now almost 35 years that really made everybody confused as to when it's appropriate for schools to restrict what student journalists have to say. And the New Voices movement is entirely those students and advisors and people who care about student media saying, this is specifically where we think it's appropriate, but generally we think there's student press freedom, or should be. Where the legislation that we've modeled is very simple. It says that student journalists determine the content of student media, not school officials, student journalists. They do that through their editorial process. There is a whole structure for that as well that deals with journalistic ethics and all sorts of things that the student journalists are experts in that none of us have any other clue. But they are the ones who are in control of what's in the student media. You cannot restrict or censor student media except in very specific circumstances. That's libel, that's slander, that's unwarranted invasions of privacy, and that is presenting a material and substantial disruption to the school. This is the kind of stuff where if you're following journalistic ethics, it's not going to be a problem. It's also exactly the same speech that every other student on campus has the right to. One thing that we forget about a lot in this discussion is that under the Supreme Court's decision, student journalists who are trying to be truth tellers in their community in a responsible way have fewer free speech rights than everybody else. So they can go write whatever they want on social media, as much as it's conjecture and hypotheticals and all of this stuff. But if you want to write about it legitimately and ethically in the student media, your school can clamp down on you for almost any reason. New Voices says that's not acceptable. We want to make sure student journalists have the right to say what they need to say within those limits. And critically, student media advisors cannot be penalized for refusing to illegally censor their students. It's very simple. It's now law in 15 states. We're recording this on Friday the 20th. Check back with me in the evening on Monday the 23rd, because cross your fingers, we may have a 16th state in Hawaii. But we've got students and advisors in almost every state in the country who are working really hard to make sure that student journalists can do the work that matters to them in their communities.
Thank you. And Sara, what do you have a profession that you are going to follow once you graduate? And if so, is it something connected with journalism?
Yeah, hopefully. I was actually just talking to my advisor about this before the semester ended, but I've only ever done written journalism, which I love, so I could totally see myself doing something like that. But next semester, I'm also going to be trying out broadcast journalism I just want to try everything and then figure out what I want to do, but definitely something with journalism. I love being the storyteller, and I feel like I learn so much just from talking to people.
And we learn a lot from talking to you. So, John, now that this bill is law, what is next for the New Voices movement?
Well, as Hillary mentioned, we're working very closely with them in terms of this rollout of information, because really, many schools and students might not have heard even about it. I mean, we try to get publicity. The NJEA Review did an article that actually Tom McHale wrote, and that was great because it goes out to all the teachers and educators in the state. We are also, doing the rollout with the Student Press Law Center. They actually are going to eventually have a 16-page printed brochure that will be able to be handed out to the students, as well as the principals and the administrators and every stakeholder involved. And so we are doing our best to get the word out to our membership, to others statewide, to let them understand this is the law and here is what it involves, and that there is a mandate in terms of the policy, that the policy will be followed. We want the students to understand that, schools can't do things like they've done in the past, where maybe they said, well, the school paper has to promote school spirit and they can't do this and they can't do that. That's not what the policy should include. And so we're hoping, not only through email and through, all kinds of other methods that we're doing, students, actually our team had been involved in doing things on social media. So we're getting word out that way. We're hoping that we're going to have another Rutgers session. Hoping with COVID and everything else, we will be back. And that actually would be October 24th, if we swing it. And we'll fill you in more about that. But what? Okay. And of course, you were there. You saw the energy a few years ago. I guess it was 2017. That's and the students were very active and energized. And of course, that made a big difference to them to see that when you came on campus and you spoke to them, and you were really determined. You said, we're going to do this. And you did. I mean, there's no doubt.
did it together.
Yes, but it went through in that December, following that October, and then again you reintroduced it the following January because the assembly had not passed it and taken it on. So again, the students saw that, and we're hoping to be able to really do an in-person rollout with all of these materials. Eventually, Student Press Law Center has talked about doing posters for the classrooms. And so, yes, it's an ongoing process, and we will monitor what goes on in terms of making sure that the students aren't self-censoring, as Sara said, and that they are not just caving in to an administrator who doesn't quite get it, that it is the law.
It is the law. And in that regard, I want to thank you, John, you, Hillary, and you, Sara, for joining us today. This is The People's Perspective, and I'm Senator Gill. Thank you for watching.